Let me introduce our first speaker today, Sarah Whiting. Sarah is the Dean and the William Ward Watkin Professor at the Rice School of Architecture in Houston. Sarah Whiting's work revolves around architecture's catalytic relationship to politics, economics, and society, focusing especially on the individual and the collective relationship to architecture and the city. As well, she focused on the nature of public life itself as it is currently being reformulated in the buildings and urbanism of the 21st century. As well as an educator and writer, she is a partner in the architectural practice WW. Sarah's presentation title for her presentation is On Judgment. Sarah, please take the floor.
Thank you. I'll take this few minutes before the clock actually starts to say thank you to everyone for organizing such a fantastic conference. It started very well last night with dinner, and I'm sure we'll continue through these 2 days. It's a little daunting to go first, and I warn you that what I'm going to talk about is something that is in part tied to interdisciplinarity, in part tied to the school, but also just a personal concern of mine right now, let's say. So when President and Mrs. Obama moved into the White House, they were asked to choose some paintings from the National Gallery to hang in their new home. One of their choices was this painting by Ed Ruscha, which was done in 1983, entitled I Think I'll, with an ellipse after that. I was kind of shocked, actually, by this choice. Don't get me wrong, I love Ruscha. I also love Obama. But the choice only seemed to be enumerating problems instead of proposing even a single solution. Isn't it critical to have a president who's decisive, not hesitant? True, it's ridiculously challenging even to imagine making the decisions that Obama has to make on a daily basis, but the example nonetheless points to the importance of making decisions, or more simply put, to the question of judgment. How do we judge in architecture? Rarely uttered out loud, this question underlies all that we do in schools of architecture, as practitioners of architecture and as critics of architecture. But how do we really know when a design is right? How does any one of us decide whether a building is good or bad? Does a question go unuttered because it's too obvious or because it's anything but? Judgment is such a weighty term. So heavy, so fraught, it provokes a bewildering aura when attention is drawn to it, like the doubt that comes when thinking too long about how a word is spelled. Asking why a decision was made guarantees a frozen panic. For all our earnest bluster, self-conscious doubts run deep in the waters of architectural production. Judgment makes us uncomfortable because it's judgmental. Open-mindedness is the de rigueur personality trait for contemporary thinkers. No doubt, we've long reaped the benefits of an ever-expanding field, the very interdisciplinarity tabled by this conference. New topics, new voices, new disciplines, new geographies, new politics have exponentially multiplied, establishing a richer and more beneficial world for all of us. To be judgmental seems utterly at odds with this expanded horizon, and yet, looking across architecture today, it strikes me that in our relentless pursuit of everything, we may have crossed the invisible line that separates proliferate good intentions from an avalanche of indiscriminacy. Because while we see more, we register less. Simultaneity has displaced singularity. Ticker tapes of topics run across the bottom of every news screen. Google searches generate a multitude of answers to any given question. Walkers who stumble while texting blame the obstacles rather than acknowledging that their multitasking may be putting them at risk. We're no longer held back by the assumption that you can't rub your belly and pat your head at the same time. And even if we laughingly curse this condition, too much information, we feel more powerful for it. Armed with our smartphones, we can pepper our conversations with facts, with examples, and most importantly, with confidence. But while this information-packed world may be long on facts, it's short on opinions. How do you pursue architecture in such a milieu? Is it a like tag on an early morning surf through ArcDaily? Why like? Is it the project's beautifully formed concrete cantilevers? Is it the elegance of its sharply peaked form? Have you ever stopped to wonder why more than half the projects on Arc Daily every day seem to fall in one or both of these two categories? Have you ever taken the time to wonder much about anything that you see there, or on ArcConnect, or whatever blog or news feed you tune into? We're always short on time, so we always surf, skim, and survey our way through all information, architecture included, daily, even hourly. But does ever more mean ever better? Has architecture advanced beyond what it was a year ago, a decade ago, a half century ago? Have our cities become better? Have we enhanced our cultural present? Have we enhanced our prospective future? At first, the abundance of information was liberating. It offered an aura of something akin to intelligence. Proliferation itself became a methodology, and exhaustive grew to be the obligatory qualifier for research. Labor could be measured not in hours, but in the quantity of options that were produced. But prodigious output not ought to be mistaken for conceptual consequence. And far worse, the sheer multiplicity of our output might be muffling more urgently needed speculations about the future. Architectural judgments radiate from articulated and argued discourses. Across the 20th century, these discourses included, among others, technological optimism, good life modernism, populism, environmentalism, and for lack of a better term, brash capitalism. If the status quo felt stifling, one could always turn the status quo on its head. Less is more not to your taste? No problem. How about less is a bore? Camps, the easiest way of identifying oneself, are also the easiest way of breaking ranks, of moving on. Camps bother us today. I want to live here, not there, has come to signal vulnerability or even incorrectness. But isn't it precisely that kind of desire, that kind of visceral subjectivity, that leads us towards a tomorrow which is better than today? Architecture is about choices. It's about how architects negotiate the countless decisions that take place along the way from A to B. Should this room be next to that room? What's an institution? Is a factory treating its employees well? Are they part of what Virno calls the multitude? How does my project affect their individuality? How tall is a guardrail? What does it mean to make a plan within a plan? Why am I working with this client? Will water get through there? Is concrete better than steel? Should I pay attention to context? Do I need a new font? Should that glass line up with that wall? Is that paint toxic? That architects face a barrage of choices is nothing new, though we surely face more of them and from further concerns of the world, further corners of the world, than at any previous moment in history. What has changed is that they render us increasingly taciturn. We may be intentionally reserved. Architects are generally more diffident than they used to be. Or we may be paralyzed, overwhelmed by so many possibilities. Or perhaps we've succumbed to a world of clients, banks, and project managers whose rise to significance has paralleled architecture's diminished voice. Or we might simply be more selfish than we ought to be. The world has become, well, so messy. Why bother? Whatever the case, our muteness is particularly startling when one considers the fact that architecture is intrinsically generalist. Architecture is nothing other than a means of assembling relations across its many constituent threads, threads that are never the same in any two projects. And the only hope that an architect has for making her way across this ever-changing turf is to be an expert at making decisions. Interdisciplinarity is not a judgment. It's simply a given, an exciting given as we'll see over these 2 days, but at this point, frankly, it's really a given. For it to be effective in advancing architectural practice and discourse, it's critical that we not let interdisciplinarity become an elaborate avoidance strategy for facing judgment head-on. We can't end our endeavors in perpetual ellipses. It's our role to teach students to think, I'll do X, or I'll do Y, or I'll do Z, to make considered judgments, not random choices, that stem from careful, close readings from within and from without our discipline. These readings take time, and take time to learn. It's also our role to construct that time in our world that never has enough time. If contemporary architecture seems complex, I'd argue that it isn't. If someone were to say that what we do is simple, I'd beg to differ. Architects decide how to add X and Y and then to add that to Z. It's a process that's neither complicated nor simple, but it's one that takes practice, the practice of putting actual things together and the practice of thought. To echo Sloterdijk, thought that potentially advances rather than maintaining our discipline. It's a day-to-day life that is full of judgments. We evaluate things, we say that this will be better than that, or worse than that, and then we put things together in such a way that architecture supersedes all of those individual decisions with the conviction that tomorrow will be better than today, one judgment at a time. 8 minutes, 9 seconds. I'm done.
Thank you, Sarah. Also for staying in time. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Joachim Declerck. He's the founder and program director of Architecture Workroom in Brussels. Since 2011, and together with David van Severen and Jamel Kluž, he is teaching the thesis studio at the Versailles School of Architecture, focusing on territorial and metropolitan development. From 2005 till 2011, Joachim has been teaching studios and coordinating research projects at the Berlage Institute. I know Joachim as a colleague at the Berlage Institute, and especially I know him, and I think he really created a very strong position in favor for space and architecture at the Berlage Institute, and not only there. I'm very curious what you're saying today. His title of the presentation today is Architecture Workroom.
But maybe the subtitle is more meaningful to our discussions later on. Architecture Workroom is a practice, that's for sure. It's an NGO that I founded in a post-Berlage time in Brussels. A practice that does not build, but we still think it's a form of design practice. And from that perspective, I'm going to start from a perspective that starts in Brussels or in that, let's say, neighboring region seen from here, talking about what type of design practices we might wish for, we are testing, and maybe also what kind of architectural education might be needed for that. So a design practice that does not build, of course, that does not mean that there's no building. And in the region that I'm working, this is a map of the urbanization in Brussels to the south, Antwerp to the north, and Ghent. So the centerpiece of the region I'm living, one of the most dispersed urban situations in Europe. And in that situation, there is a very strong design practice that is more and more internationally recognized. Architects from Belgium are working across the globe, but there is a strong practice, and if we look at what they produce, the perfect living conditions in this spread out metropolis, new strong architecture offices like Office Kerstin Geers, David van Severen, teaching all over the world from New York to other places. They are building in this condition, and they are adding a layer to this condition. So the question is here, a project by 51N4E, a practice from Brussels, in which they treat an old single-family farm-like house, and they open it up with a steel wall in order to make a new kind of living condition. In a study we made for the Flemish government architect, which is entitled Towards a Visionary Housing Production, the central question is, in fact, if we have that very good and strong architecture that is published in all architecture magazines throughout the world, especially the last years, and exhibited on the Biennale, the past 3 Biennales had an increasing presence of Belgian architects. To the left, we can see all kinds of publications made about that type of architecture. To the right, we see what is actually built. And so there's a plea to construct and to use architecture to solve a problem, namely spread out urbanization, which means that in 30 years we will be in traffic jams, that already we spend 60% of our global environmental budget to repair the sewage system, which is so spread out that it costs enormous amounts of money. So what's the question here for architecture? If we continue This is the planned extension of housing in a region around Antwerp. That's how it would attack the landscape, and that's how it would add up to the already built urban space. The question is here, do we talk about housing products, to the left? Is that the question for architecture? Or can we find new ways to connect those who build, operators, private and public actors who build, who need to make profit in building houses, and can we connect that to the policy? So what is our question for architecture? Is it to design strong answers to a given question, the question to build a home, or can we use design to rephrase the question and to reformulate the question and invent a new development mechanism that responds to maybe more relevant questions that are also lying outside of the field of architecture? So in that sense, my entire presentation for a design practice that does not build is a plea to increase skills and increase the capacity of architects to design the right questions and the conditions for strong answers. It's not a plea against strong architecture, but it's a plea for another capacity. The way we have organized and positioned architecture in society in all kinds of formats is, to the left you have the ones formulating the question. To the right you have the ones, that is the case in the practice of architecture through competitions and so on. They can produce the winning answer, and in between you have something that separates the world of the question from the world of the answer, and that's procedures. And the question is, where is architectural education in this? Is architectural education on the side of producing the answers, the best answers, or can we maybe envision another role for architecture education, a broader role for architecture education? So we need more design capacity that is able to tweak the system instead of making the products in that system. And I think there, the role for architecture education, and that's the provocation or the contribution maybe to the debate, how can we structure a form of architectural education that is capable of involving itself not only with the purity of the architectural object and project, but also with the dirtiness of the decision-making and the dynamics in society that is outside of that. So in other words, we have huge challenges facing, which are very different per region where all of us come from, but there's enormous challenges that have to do with spatial development. On the other hand, we do build things. The question is, how can we sit together with those actors in society in order to make sure that what we build, what we transform, has any relation with what is the urgency? So what is the capacity of design? The capacity of design is to short-circuit long-term political goals with short-term actions. That's something that architects can do best. They can see how a small intervention can actually launch a long-term transformation. To go back to that study we made for the housing production in Flanders, in order to actually hijack and cross-cut the current policy making, which we won't change as architects, we launched the pilot projects housing. And those pilot projects are actually trying to take those same very successful architects, but involve them on questions that they never get commissions for which they never get questions. Actually, we involve them, 5 of these teams are involved to produce new types of schemes for the transformation of a sprawled urban landscape. And those schemes are not only architects' visions or architects' ideas. These ideas are subsequently presented to an audience. It's the Minister of Housing who supports this. And there's a selection of pilot commissioners, cities, regions that jump into the game and who will be working in the next months together to launch pilot projects and to actually build the change in that housing policy. Design helps identify shared questions and formulate a shared agenda for spatial development. We had the opportunity to fill or to exhibit in the Belgian pavilion in the last Venice Biennale, and actually that exhibition project was used by a team larger than us to produce the project The Ambition of the Territory, which was a provocation not very much, or let's say not especially, to the public of the Venice Biennale, but much more, or at least as much, to the current policy making in Flanders. An exhibition where actually what was exhibited in this hall was the result of design research in which we tried, through visions for how agricultural and urban development could go together and not be in a constant struggle, we worked together with designers, international group of designers, but also with those actors that are actually constantly fighting with each other for space, the agricultural sector, the environmental expert, urban designers. Those were working together around one table in order to actually test what would be means to integrate the different demands. On the basis of this work, the next step was, in a kind of miniature version, you recognize the Belgian pavilion in Venice, but in the scale 50%. That was built in Antwerp in a next exhibition, where we actually invited all of these parties to come back and to sit around the table and to build a common design agenda for Flanders, for that region of Belgium. And actually that design agenda, which has 10 urgencies on which everybody agreed and 80 design questions, is a kind of document that is subscribed or signed, you could say, by a number of institutional actors, policymakers, stakeholders, civil society actors, which is discussed by them and which is now picked up further into design questions. Design can also change the planning thinking, planning instruments and rules that enable a meaningful transformation. In Brussels, the city that is the capital of Europe, or one of the capital cities of Europe, it's the third or second richest region of Europe, but it's also dealing with an unemployment rate of 20%. So it's a clear symbol of our current social situation in Europe. The blue in this map is the poorest parts, the red is the wealthiest parts. What you see in the blue part is that a canal, a former industrial area, is running through this area. And what we did is to try to launch and invent an adapted instrument, a planning instrument that would be able to deal with these social challenges in this part. So in that sense, a designer, through a selection procedure, has been invited not to produce his vision for that territory, but to sit along with all the actors that have a piece of the pie and develop a vision for that region. That vision is actually responding to a huge question, which is that the public government does not have land, so cannot build a city on its own land. And so the design project is actually the invention of new public land that didn't exist before, port areas and so on, that can be transformed. So in that sense, design can actually build instruments or launch instruments that enable governments to attack their problems. Design can point to possible synergies between sectors and stakeholders. I finish in 2 minutes. Istanbul is a clear example, a project that was done in the framework of the Biennale Rotterdam, where for one reason, for the reason of drinking water, the north is protected from urban development, but at the same time the north is being developed or is being taken over by urban development. So the question is, how can you actually link those completely contradicting developments between protecting a region of Istanbul for water management reasons and developing a city because of economic growth of Turkey? Through a workshop system, we actually produced a solution in which the urban development produces the water that is necessary to have healthy agriculture, which in turn protects the water system of the city. So in that sense, the design has the capacity to go cross-sectoral and to link the needs of different sectors in one vision that could change the fate of Istanbul if it were to be picked up at the metropolitan scale. It's leading now to a pilot project for Istanbul. And the last slide is my title again. Could we imagine that we need to broaden the scope of our design education or architectural education to equip architects not only to produce the best responses to given questions, but much more to involve them in designing the right questions and also in participating in processes where it's not the final genius design that is being the winner or selected as winner of a kind of competition, but in which the design is actually an instrument of revealing shared problems and also shared answers to problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Joachim. Our next speaker, Neelkanth Chhaya. He's the Dean of the Faculty of Architecture and the Center for Environmental Planning and Technology at the University at Ahmedabad. As an architect and academic, Neelkanth Chhaya has researched and worked extensively on emphasizing the adaptation of built form to physical and social contexts, especially landform and landscapes. He's also deeply interested in the cultural factors that affect architecture, especially in societies of rapid change. In recent years, he has been involved in post-disaster participatory rehabilitation housing projects, as well as mass housing projects in urban areas. Neelkanth already participated in the second International Architectural Education Summit in Madrid. I'm glad you came. His title is From Professions to Communities of Practice.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be at this conference again. We are faced with great uncertainty today. Natural systems are increasingly erratic. Demand for resources is increasing while supply is diminishing. Economics, social life, and politics are in a state of turmoil. Technologies are transforming the world, solving and creating problems unknown before. Existing knowledge is unable to tackle the constantly changing challenges. In this situation, the known boundaries and definitions of fields of knowledge and of professional systematization are bound to transform. I come from a society that has struggled to deal with challenges. It is also a place where new approaches are being vigorously tried out. The conventional forms of architectural practice have only marginally touched the large challenges we face. How do we conduct an education that cultivates a sense of adventurous inquiry outside the known limits of the profession as we know it? I propose to share a few of our experiences at CEPT University. Traditional models of university were based on watertight, vertical, discipline-based specialization and hierarchical horizontal layers. As the university became a sort of knowledge-producing unit, this departmental division of labor and lines of management and command fitted perfectly with the Fordist model of economy. And the fragmentation of knowledge and organization wreaked havoc on the environment, on society, and on individuals. An alternative model of interdisciplinary methods emerged and brought some creative energy to our work. But networking, while beneficial, was sometimes tedious and cumbersome. Thinking further, a model where communities of practice, without great emphasis on institutional and disciplinary boundaries, emerges and becomes one of the promising scenarios. How does such a community come about? The university, we believe, in encounter with societal environment, and it may be the place where seeds of such an approach may be planted. This was diagrammed by one of our founders, Bernard Cohn, in an interaction between disciplines in parallels in this interaction with society. So he's got the left side are the disciplines, on the right side is the real world as it's called, and we took this into a project that we did together. At CEPT, we have education and research going on in various disciplines: architecture, planning, construction technologies, design, management, and humanities. We realized that this diversity had powerful educational potential. At the same time, we believed that the only way to approach the extremely complex and urgent situation facing our milieu was to learn to work in an inter, cross, and even transdisciplinary manner. We therefore started a program called the Interactive Workshop. mandatory for each student at least once in the career. The workshop was organized in a 6-week interregnum where regular timetabling was suspended, and those participating in the workshop attended it instead of going for an educational study tour. Thus, all participants were involved in this full-time in this activity, and both faculty and students were from all kinds of disciplines working in various groups. Taking an issue of societal concern as the subject matter, in this case the Sabarmati River, which runs through Ahmedabad, we proceeded to carry out the transdisciplinary study of various issues connected to this theme. Each study group consisted of students and faculty members from all the disciplines. And then the final part of this was to present this at a local market in the local language, so that here you can see the students are interacting. And this was actually the most important part of the process, because they learned much more by talking to all these people in simple language, not jargon. And I think that that was the main part of the workshop. We have conducted 5 such workshops until now, and the nature of relationships across the disciplines, both the synergies as well as the frictions, have energized interaction, both academic and social, on campus and with the community. Natural disasters, while being destructive and traumatic, stimulate genuine and passionate concern and can transform our relationship to the natural world. Thus, they are great learning challenges and opportunities. While we cannot schedule such disasters into our timetables, we can seize every situation of crisis to throw ourselves into the situation and extract educational experience out of it. At the same time, we come closer to our community and perhaps create opportunities for communities of practice to emerge. I illustrate with 2 examples: the Gujarat earthquake of 2001 and the floods on the Kosi River in 2009. CEPT University participated in reconstruction measures during both these disasters. Faculty and students were exposed to the multidimensional complexity of problems in reconstruction. While planning, design, and technology were their central concerns and core knowledge, they could not avoid the plethora of other issues, political, social, and economic, that were part of the situation. Especially because they were in completely unfamiliar territory, rural, poverty-ridden, they had to look afresh. And you can see here the meetings that the students participated in, and then the evolution of various very simple reconstruction types, which people over a period of time, over the last several years, have been adapting, and our students are still studying the new, what was given and what emerged as a kind of a place that was made by architects, but very much with people. The Kosi River flood was also another such situation. That shows the floods, and then the way in which we, along with a faculty member, students, they participated in working with the villages to decide how to rebuild. You can see a meeting happening there. And then the students documented and learnt about the techniques that were common in the village and the new ones that would come in. And they learnt directly in contact with the craftspeople in the villages. And all the time, there was a new invention. Here, for example, you can see on the bottom right, there's a pump for making bamboo insect resistant, which is made out of whatever is available, and it can do 6 bamboos at a time. And that was quite an invention, and it's in the tradition of what in India we call jugaad. So like that, there was both invention as well as understanding of the existing situations, and then working to bring in new methods also into the village where it was useful. So the students had to enlarge their concerns and knowledge to such an extent that they were transformed even as individuals. They therefore brought back to the university a completely different outlook and approach. Up to this point, I have only cited examples of the kind of educational innovations that may help us to deal with the future. It is also necessary to briefly consider some underlying philosophical aspects that can broadly underpin the modes of working. Firstly, and most importantly, the place of learning ought to be one of the sites offering a new and fresh imagination of what could be. So that you have, I think, the issue of judgment, which was the first talk, already integrated into the way of looking that the student and the faculty member develops by being challenged in this new environment. And the working of the head and the heart together. And so the place of learning is not only a system of generating and transmitting knowledge, it is a society in itself. The vitality of its connections with reality and its ability to distance itself from the urgencies of society are equally important. Certainly, it should not become an industrial unit competing in the market for clients. Its own subculture is an important part of the educational mechanisms. As the communications-rich world approaches a saturation condition of sameness, the disconnected world, the major part of the planet's population and space, will be a huge pool of diversity. Either the monoculture eats up this diversity, or the divergent systems eat up the monoculture, or there is an enrichment of diversity by mutual exchanges and creative contamination. Education needs to move away from the mode of replication by binary fission and become the friendly medium supporting inter-system couplings, leading all the time to the birth of unexpected forms. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Beatriz Colomina. She's the director of the graduate school, the PhD program at the School of Architecture in Princeton University, and she's also the director of the interdisciplinary program Media and Modernity at Princeton University. As an architectural historian and theorist, Beatriz has written extensively on architecture and media, and her publications include Privacy and Publicity, Modern Architecture as Mass Media, Domesticity at War, Sexuality and Space, and Clip, Stamp, Fold, The Radical Architecture of Little Magazines. In 2006-2007, she co-curated the exhibition Clip, Stamp, Fold, The Radical Architecture of Little Magazines, at the Storefront for Art and Architecture, which has since toured worldwide, most recently in South America. Her exhibition Playboy Architecture 1953 to 1979 is now at the NIE in Rotterdam. Beatriz will introduce her thoughts towards a radical pedagogy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. It's always been a great occasion to reflect on what we do on pedagogy. So thank you very much, Itoshi and Martha, for organizing this series of conference. I think I've been in all 3 of them, in Segovia actually as a tourist. And I find it always extremely stimulating. The title of my talk is Radical Pedagogy. You have it? Yeah. Yeah, this is a PDF, yeah? You can put it on. It's Radical Pedagogy, which is actually an ongoing multi-year collaborative research project, which I have been leading with a team of PhD students in the School of Architecture at Princeton University. And involves deep archival work, oral histories, lectures and workshops with protagonists and scholars from schools all over the world. Here you have a map of the schools that we have looked into. The organizing paradigm of this is collaborative work in which the distinctions between teacher and student and between scholars and protagonists are blurred. In fact, most protagonists of this period, as you know, were also teachers, archivists, writers, and even activists. Here is Giancarlo De Carlo. As you know, Giancarlo De Carlo was an anarchist. Here is with the students in the Triennale de Milano, about to close the Triennale, but in fact one wonders who is more radical, Giancarlo or the students. The Triennale occupy global tours on the group around Florence, Ant Farm, and Cheap Lord, and even Manfredo Tafuri, just to make the point that of how these protagonists are also teachers and activists. We too, our team, consider ourselves activists. We see scholarship as having real effects in the world, history as not something distant, but something alive, fully alive. The project is part of a series of experiments which go back more than 10 years, and the initial idea was actually to try to find a new educational model where instead of having PhD students work in isolation in some kind of obscure research, something that they will have time to do later, you take students in the first year and work with them collaboratively in the research, but also very important, this research is oriented towards the production of something, a book, a conference, an exhibition, a film. It is now almost 40 years since PhD programs in architecture were first established in the United States, and it's time to rethink the pedagogical approach to these programs. To give you a sense, 64 was Penn, 68 Cornell, 70 Berkeley, 73 Princeton, 74 MIT, 87 Harvard, 89 Virginia, 94 Columbia, and Yale didn't have a PhD program until 2009. So we are really, these programs are still in a way in their infancy. What I think is that really the model of the isolated scholar is inadequate today. The collaborative apply, thinking of design studios can act as a new model for scholarly research, and maybe this is a delay lesson from learning from Las Vegas, which used the studio context to develop theory and publish it in the form of an innovative book. In reverse, we treat scholarly research as a kind of studio project, both in the sense of collaborative laboratory and in the sense of treating research itself as an act of design. So starting in 2000, I have led 7 experiments in this spirit. One is the Cold War hot houses that ended up in a collaborative book. Then there was the discipline building, which became a big conference. This is actually a conference on the history of the PhDs, where there are people like Peter Eisman, Diana Agres, Mark Jarsenbest, Denise Scott Brown, even Sarah Whiting, who is here, and many others that you can see in the audience that were protagonists of that conference. Finally, next was the Clipstand Fall, which opened as an exhibition at the storefront for art and architecture in New York in 2006, and has since then traveled to 12 cities around the world, and is recently open in Chile and in Bogota. The book came out in 2010, but the archive is alive and continues to grow as the exhibition moves from place to place. So it's not an exhibition in a suitcase, but as we go to Latin America, new research on Latin American magazine has been incorporated into the archive, an archive that keeps growing as we move from place to place. Meanwhile, we started the project Learning from Levittown, which is based on a book never published by Venturi and Scott Brown. The continuation of the studio Learning from Las Vegas was Learning from Levittown, and the project here is to do a film, which we are still working on it. And finally, Playboy Architecture, which opened in Maastricht last fall and is now the NIE in Rotterdam. Well, I'm telling all of this because Radical Pedagogy, the project that we are going to talk about today, started almost 3 years ago, and is now being installed in the Triennale of Lisbon as we speak. The last project is the historiography of modern architecture in Latin America, and appeared as a pilot exhibition in Sao Paulo in the School of Architecture in the FAO of Sao Paulo last March. The way these projects overlap is actually part of the method. The projects are collaborative across generations, and the projects influence each other, even if we always experiment with new kinds of archives, new kinds of analysis, and new kinds of communication. But going back to radical pedagogy, which is the point here, the key point of the radical pedagogy project is that pedagogical experiments play a really crucial role in shaping architectural discourse and practice in the second half of the 20th century. The organizing hypothesis of our research is that these experiments can be understood as radical architectural practice in their own right. They are radical in the literal meaning of the term, Latin term radice, as something belonging or relating to the root, to its basis or foundation. Radical pedagogy shake foundation, disturb assumptions rather than reinforce and disseminate them. This challenge to normative thinking was a major force in the post-war field of architecture and has surprisingly been neglected in recent years. I think if we are to think about what we are going to do today in terms of pedagogical innovation, we have to go back to this period, because it's the only period, the last period in which there was absolutely radical innovation in the field of pedagogy. This is, of course, images of Valparaiso in Chile. This is the Polyart bus tour in London, organized by Peter Murray, among others, and involving several schools. This is actually the School of Design in Ahmedabad, where the IMS came as consultants. This is Negroponte, the machine group at MIT. This was also, of course, a time of collective defiance against the authority of institutional, bureaucratic, and capitalist structures, geopolitical landscape further transformed by the Cold War and the Vietnam War. Here you have all these kinds of protests that happen, of course, the occupation of the Triennale that we saw before, the School of Paris, the Beaux-Arts School, again, Paris, 68, Columbia University is on strike, Yale University, the building is burned, and the students are also in the streets. So it's precisely in this context of protests emerging from all the universities, that the most radical pedagogy projects were last established. This is also, as I say, in the context of the Cold War, of a domestic environment built out of consumable plastics and objects of mass-produced desire, and an utopian technological prophecy foretold in science fiction tales now realized in a brave new world of computation, gadgets, and spaceships. Architecture, of course, was not impervious to such shifts, as you can see in all these ways in which architecture incorporated these questions. The discipline sought to stake its claims amidst a new territory by articulating its relationship to the variety of technological, sociopolitical, and cultural transformations that were occurring. Whether in high-tech spaceships or in informal slums. I mean, it's very interesting that this, Hubert is around here, but, this question of the informal slums also comes very strongly from that period. Architecture, as classically defined, is gone. Architecture itself has become indeterminate. In this situation, the discipline was forced to examine its own protocols. While some forms of radical practice celebrated architecture's integrations in a larger cultural milieu, like in this case, that is whether it's political, cultural, economical, or even ecological. Think about all these covers of domus. I mean, in many ways you feel like you are today, because we have the same, in a way, problems than in the 70s, etc., where others responded by retreating into an investigation of formalism, as it happened, for example, at Cooper Union and other places, right? So all those exercises from Cooper Union. A shared understanding among these very different radical practices was that a new modus of operandi for the discipline could only be created if traditions were questioned, destabilized, undermined, or even destroyed. education actually became a vehicle for these subversive actions. And it's very important to understand that this is not just a kind of Western phenomena. It's not the United States in Europe. This is Mexico. And this is the AEA. Urgent concerns provoked radical upheavals in academic institutions where alternative visions of the discipline were generated through progressive pedagogical initiatives. Pedagogy operated as an active agent in the processes with which it was concerned, rather than through modes of detached or complacent reflection. Radical pedagogies challenge conventions at different scale. They relentlessly question the institutions of education, probe architectural disciplinary assumptions, and aim to disturb architecture's relation to social, political, and economical process. Of course, the term, this is of course the AEA in London under Alvin Boyarsky, which is another example. And here you have, for example, a quote of Rem Koolhaas about the AEA. This is 1972. And he says, in case you cannot read it from the back, the scene, London Architectural Association, 1970-1972, a school abuzz in sex, drugs, and rock and roll. David Bowie hanging at the bar. For a studio, write a book if you want, dance or piece your pants if you want, extractors or codes or HVAC, go to Switzerland. Right? So this in many ways captures not only what was happening at the AA, but what is happening in a variety of schools. 1 minute, okay. So, but is radical pedagogy an oxymoron? It was one of the questions to emerge from our group. And indeed, radical means going back to the origins, as I said, to change the system, and pedagogy implies a system. Then radical pedagogy seems like an oxymoron at first, but perhaps this is true of all radical practices. If you think about it, you need a system to undermine an existing system. Radical pedagogy, in other words, might be a sort of transitional phase, that is, a system is developed to undermine an existing system, but eventually the new system is institutionalized and no longer radical, and it will have to be undermined by another form of radical practice. In the same way that every avant-garde inevitably becomes a monument that needs to be challenged by another one. So it is important to remember that the avant-gardes are always systematic, even before they are absorbed by the institutions of the market. Radical pedagogy, therefore, is not an oxymoron. It is that key phase when a new system is used to undermine an old system. And just to give you a sense of all these kind of formal meetings that are taking place in the context of this complete transformation of pedagogy. So this is Ulm around a table, again Ulm, the IAES, so all these tables where people, the Institute of Architecture in New York, or in the grass in this Greek party in Valparaiso, or again in the grass with Bucky Fuller, or finally again in Ritoque with the students and faculty making, in a way, the architecture, becoming themselves the architects. So subversion takes a very architectural quality in the end. So in conclusion, I think that architectural pedagogy has become stale, that the schools spin all wheels of as if something is happening, but very little is actually going on. Students wait for a sense of activist engagement with a rapidly evolving world, but graduate before this engagement happens. Teachers, likewise, worry too much about their place in the institutional hierarchies. Curricular structures have hardly changed in recent decades, despite the major transformations that have taken place with the growth of globalization, new technologies, and information culture. As schools appear to increasingly favor professionalization, they seem to drown in self-imposed bureaucratic oversight, suffocating any possibility for the emergence of experimental practices and failures. There are a few attempts to wake things up here and there, but it's all in the end, in my view, too timid in the end. They are not real innovations. So in response to this timidity of the schools today, this radical pedagogy project returns to the educational experiments of the 1960s and 70s to remind us of what can happen when pedagogy takes on risks. It is a provocation, therefore, and a call to arms. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beatriz, for sharing your thoughts on radical pedagogy. Our next speaker is Winka Dubbeldam. Winka holds the chair of architecture at the University of Pennsylvania School of Design in Philadelphia. She's concerned with blending pragmatics and provocation in her role as educator and design studio leader. Alongside her design studios tackling real social and environmental issues, Winka has conducted her own investigative work that has been featured in international professional journals and in monographs. She is the principal of New York-based Architectonics, known for its use of hybrid sustainable materials and smart building systems. Winka recently had an exhibition here at IAES Architecture Forum with the title Downtown Bogota, My Idol City. Last year, Winka used the opportunity to come here to Berlin, to come to ANCB and to work here with her students at the IAES Network Campus Berlin. Winka's title is The New Normal. Thank you for coming.
It's always nice to be the one after Beatriz, right? Thanks, Beatriz. Thank you, Toshi, for inviting me. It's really great to be here in my first year as chair at the University of Pennsylvania. You all might know the University of Pennsylvania is a gigantic institute. It's over 45,000 students. And at Penn Design, we have over 600 alone. So it's been quite an interesting task, having been there myself really long as the head of the second master's program over 10 years now, which has started in 2003 and has been tackling a lot of issues on a very small scale with maybe annually 45 students, but still in a level which I feel is quite important to think about. So partially you'll see some of that as well. It's an exciting time to be an architect, I think. Challenges in the economy have impacted our profession greatly. Environmental and natural disasters have put us on edge. Digital technologies continue to transform the means and ends of our field. A number of pressing matters have changed what it means to be an architect, and it's high time we rethink who we are as a profession and a discourse and how we can best position ourselves in society. Michel Serres claimed very early on, it's not the idea that you solve a problem, but you create the right problem. Having just completed the very busy first semester at Penn as a chair, I would like to update you on a few initiatives I started and immediately realized that there is no linear way of tackling any problem. Of course, as I thought that I would just observe my first semester and see what I was going to do in the school, I immediately realized that the only way to go for it is an unstable equilibrium or a random interaction with many, many issues, which ultimately will create the only provocative way of handling that. The first initiative was called the Inside Out. It will involve a number of initiatives and dialogues to help turn the school inside out and bring more of our advanced research and thinking to the global and local architectural discourse. The first foray here is a new holistic concept for this publication, which was recycled was made from recycled materials, and in the same time we recycled a lot of people which I felt hadn't been talking in the school for a very long time. Not an unknown list, I would say, but really important nevertheless. The other thing we started is a conference which will be November 14 and 15, and I hope you all join, which is also an issue which is definitely not new, but keeps claiming the word new. And I guess it was my impatience with the word new that I decided to start the New Normal Conference. The New Normal Conference states a very simple fact. After 20 years of digital design, it is no longer new. There is a normal platform. And this normal platform has to be claimed by architects in the sense that we have to start to think about the new practices it has instigated. We have invited over 15 young officers who have all kind of rethought the practice of architecture and have made very, very provocative forms of practices. I feel that this is largely overseen, and I feel the negative attitude towards architecture is partially a sense of non-curiosity in what actually is going on. So we're going to look at that, and we're also going to ask these people, what if this is now the new normal, this new platform? What is now speculative, and where are we going to advance from there? At the same time, we're publishing a book which kind of deals with what Penn is really about. And I have always felt that the idea of showing only student work largely passes by the fact that we have started something at Penn called design research, where we are trying to work on the fact that design is research and research is design. There is no differentiation, and there should not be a separation between the two terms. Of course, the best person to explain this is Richard Woerman, the starter of the TED conferences, who was there last semester and gave us a very inspirational and educational talk about what research is, what systems are, and how to interact and engage other professions. Of course, the TED conferences are probably something every architect should attend. And then, of course, we have a series of people who I largely admire and who are bringing large provocations to the school, such as Cecil Balmont, who stretches art, engineering, and architecture. This is one of my studios where we work tightly with the engineering school, with major robotics. You might know that the engineering lab or the robotics lab at Penn was at the TED conferences and has developed the first set of swarming robots which work according to coordinates and are able to exercise complex tasks, construction or otherwise, as a team of robots in the air following a grid, an invisible grid, and hence never colliding. And then Ali Rahim, who's working on very different relationships between the inside and the outside and the idea of aesthetics. The curriculum, of course, is another really important part. A number of these issues have been investigated, as I said, in the postgraduate program. Interdisciplinary collaborations have actually been essential at Penn, always, but have been extended largely by integrating the robotics lab, MIT Media Lab, car companies, new production facilities, and have led to integrated specific workshops which are inserted in the studios. And added technologies are trying to differentiate from the standard 3D printing lab into having 3D printing right in the studio so that students can go back and forth between their computer and the printing. The PPD extended is really important for me, I guess, having started it, which now has an extended semester in New York with its new program. One thing which is really important of the PPD, which we have always been doing, and I think is a start also for what I want to do at Penn, is to think of education as integral society, as integral to society, and to integrate not only urban thinkers, cities, mayors, robotics, but really to start to think of how to interact with real-time people who are in the field but have, for some reason, very often very short-term visions. What we do with the postgraduate program is we don't have studios in the sense that it is only a formal or aesthetic exercise, but it integrates thinking of critical theories and advanced digital softwares, not as a separated educational tool, but as an integrated studio design tool. So it is design, thinking, and producing in one integrated studio. Of course, also important is then who are our partners. Tel Aviv had its bicentennial, asked Penn to look at the future of housing. It resulted in a competition where the students won 2 of the 5 awards, and also in an exhibit, which was quite an event and very beautiful, I think, as an urban installation. Also Ma, who I met at the jury for the Prix de Rome in New York, started a similar initiative in China and invited for him, the most advanced educational institutes to create thinking about cities, which the postgraduate program joined also. And then, of course, Arcadia, New York, where the postgraduate students enter their city study. We publish because we feel that every time we do one of those projects with our, let's say, international network, our team of international networks, that it's important to give back and to communicate back to these people. One way to advance is feedback, as we all know. So it is not important for me to take a problem and put it in the academic world. It's as important to then put that work out in a book and publish it. So this was one of the first ones we did, where we actually went back to Rome, and not to go back to Rome, but to actually look at the high-speed rail station which decentered Rome. That station was not located in the center of Rome, but in the outside of Rome, and kind of destabilized Rome in an interesting way. Not that Rome actually did that, but for us it was really important to consider that fact, and that there would be that possibility. And then the new normal, which was a study we did for a developer in Puerto Rico, where we looked at a very, very real problem and realized that there was not only, there was actually not an architectural problem, there was actually an urban problem, which I'll show a little bit about later. And then Pressing Matters, where we worked with Tom Main and the Supra Studio and Obama to look at the state of the American cities, which I will show a little bit later as well. And then this was what I was just mentioned, actually our workshop here in Berlin with IAES and with Almut, where we're actually having dinner, I think, tonight, but Almut and Armand, who have an amazing practice here. We work together with their students and our students to look at parts of Berlin. Almost done. This was a new normal. It was a proposal for Santours. As I said, it was a developer in Puerto Rico who asked, who had built an amazing tower on the edge of a slum, which is a really inventive idea, but didn't work very well, and asked us to look at that. And the first thing we realized is there was no urban plan whatsoever, a big problem in most cities. So we started looking at what is a new urban plan and why are urban plans not looked at since, I guess, the 19th century. So we started looking what is an urban plan, how to integrate new ways of infrastructures, and how to create new neighborhoods. We did a competition with 12 teams of students, won, and then that one was also nominated to be the urban planner and to create neighborhoods in their plan, and then the students started coming up with solutions for these neighborhoods, integrating all kinds of new economies, new social devices, and ways to integrate with infrastructures in new ways. This is quite interesting. We did this the year before Sandy, which is kind of peculiar. But where Tom Main looked at the inner cities of the US, I proposed to look at the outer cities, the cities really dealing with environmental and ecological disasters. New York, New Orleans, and LA. LA, of course, with earthquakes and mudslides. The other cities dealing with garbage problems, floods, and snowstorms. And my big surprise that in the US, for some reason, every time something happens, it's like it's happened for the first time. We never had a flood before. We never had a snowstorm before. They still keep axing the doors open with the train, which is always an entertaining moment in the winter. So this was one of the reasons why I looked at these cities, to come up with the students for protocols where we can start to look at what is really going on in these cities and why are there no protocols? Why is it like the city government every time thinks it's the first time it's going to flood? And then only when the flood is a little bit bigger, people start to slightly think. Having been many times in think tanks in New York to deal with floods, my biggest problem is there is always a question, and the question is always the wrong question. They never put 80 architects together and say, what is actually the question and what should we do? No, they ask us, how can we take the ground floor out of Manhattan, and how can we make buildings where we don't have a ground floor? That's where we make money, on the ground floor. So it is an insane question, and of course, you know, it's like that is probably the real problem, is that city governments are not working with young architects, they're not working with academic institutions, they are asking very limited people for very limited solutions. So we looked, of course, at very provocative installations, but started to thinking of new societies, new social solutions, new economic solutions, new ways of bringing things together which normally would have not been together. And having grown just 30% in 1 year, which gave me a huge chance to also hire a third new in faculty, I think we are well on the way to having a very excited future. And I am personally very positive and very, very excited about both education and our practice. But I do think we have to start thinking much harder and ask way more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Winka. Our next speaker is Mathias Klotz. Mathias is the Dean of the Faculty of Art, Architecture and Design at the Universidad Diego Portales in Santiago de Chile. As Professor Mathias, educational strategies revolve around the processes of perception. In his architectural work, Mathias is driven by the search for a sense of belonging and place. Mathias has achieved international recognition for residential, commercial, and public works of his architectural practice, which is based in Santiago, which employ local materials and technology and encompass a concern for the environment, local history, and culture. Mathias is one of the ANCB partners of the first hour, and he returns to Berlin and to ANCB every year. He was a participant of the ANCB's inaugural symposium, Educating the Global Architect, in 2009, 4 years ago. And as you all know, tonight, his current exhibition, The Poetics of Boxes, will open at IAES. Thank you for coming. Mathias is talking about interdisciplinary niches and links.
Thank you. So in order to be precise with the 10 minutes, I prepare a 10 minutes video. So, and we can talk later about the video. So, thank you and goodbye.
DPU academic project of the School of Architecture. In order to explain the formative model of the DPU School of Architecture, I'll start by developing a timeline with the purpose of giving some context to the country's development. With regard to the teaching of this discipline, I will also list some milestones that have accompanied this process. Secondly, I'll detail the current condition of the events, describe the challenges, and explain the expected profile of the architect from DPU and how we intend to achieve it. 1982. Diego Portales University is funded by way of new legislation that allows for the creation of non-profit private universities. Given that the model also establishes the liberalization of teaching as way to lessen power from traditional universities and increase teaching scope. The university market begins, and thus private universities belonging to businesses that permitted capital proliferation increase. DPU is initially based on an ancient stately home located on 260 Ejército Street. The schools of psychology, law, and finance located in the southwestern area of the district of Santiago are its first faculties. In spite of its central location, this is a depreciated area with a high vacancy rate and great chances to find real estate at convenient prices. 1999. The School of Architecture, Art and Design, FAAD, is created. Hernán Garfias was its first dean. This school is located on 180 República Street, just a few blocks away from the foundational property. The architect Gustavo Munizaga was the first head of the School of Architecture. He designs the first curriculum, and by the following year, 47 students register for this degree. 1 year later, Mathias Klotz became the head of the School of Architecture. 2004. DPU increases its offer, and thus more infrastructure is required. During this process, the school takes on an active role, since its professors develop the projects for all the new facilities. This allows the transferring of the academic discourse of the university's location to a heritage area, which significantly contributes to the university's prestige by consolidating a united academic body around a far-reaching and common project. During the same year, Mathias Klotz assumes responsibility as the FAAD Dean and appoints Ricardo Aguaguad as the new head of the School of Architecture. 2005. The so-called Penguin Revolution breaks out, in which high school students take over the streets demanding for better education. Under Ricardo Abaguad's administration, renovation and expansion of the building located on 180 República Street is carried out. During the same year, the school starts its classes. That is, it teaches all the subjects included in the curriculum, and the first generation of students begin processes to obtain their professional degrees. 2006. The first students obtain their professional degrees as the School of Art initiates activities, becoming FAAD's third degree program. This program completes a creative triad offering significant possibilities of interdisciplinary relations. 2011. Camila Vallejo leads a new student movement demanding free and top-quality university education for everybody breaks out. Other social conflicts add to this student movement, and the street becomes the stage for public discontent. This questions not only the economic model, but also the institutional framework imposed by the dictatorship and managed for over 20 years by the democratic governments. During the same year, and in order to diminish the overcrowding at schools and become the main link with DPU, the Nicanor Parra Library is opened. Mathias Klotz is in charge of this project. 2013. The Huechuraba campus, including the new School of Economy, is opened. This was the first project awarded by a tendering process and carried out by professors Gabriela Mansi, Rodrigo Duque, and Rafael Evia, and a group of graduates that worked as contributors. Regarding the training of architects for Chile, our school is aware of the particular moment that architecture has been facing during the last decade in our country, period in which this body was formed and developed. There has undoubtedly been a significant boom with the quality and diversity of the works, and in the prestige and national and international dissemination reached by them and their authors. Along with this process, Chile has experienced an accelerated growth and change. This has resulted in more wealth, but also in a questioning to the way in which this process is carried out, both in terms of cost and in the extent to which it affects population. Chile currently faces a crisis in terms of social integration and a shared vision of a project country. Something similar occurs with architecture itself. It has become essential to recognize that the prestige of Chilean architecture, at least until the end of the last decade, has mainly been based on projects geared towards a private demand, with limited social commitment and with a short vision of the role that this discipline plays in the construction of a more equitable, fair, and inclusive country. All of this, which has been highlighted by many external observers, was naturally related to the country's conditions, but also to the type of training architects received, and therefore the available possibilities for execution. What is a student we wish to educate like, and how do we intend to achieve it? Facing the question asked by the 28th Architecture Biennial, what are the architects we wish to educate like? The school's proposal, based on a comprehension of the challenges country that the OECD's Better Life Index indicators meant for future architects. They precisely enabled the exploration of these new possibilities discussed before, which open up the field for architects committed to a common project. In this sense, the School of Architecture assumes on its own the challenge of contributing to the country with architects committed to an inclusive and diverse vision of society, committed to the sustainable development and the common good. This certainly has been present since the foundation of the unit, among other things, in the important role that it has played in the construction of its nearest environment, the university neighborhood, and after this action, in the opening of these concerns toward the public sphere, first the district of Santiago, and later the city, the country, the territory, life quality, and the active participation in this discussion, and the promulgation of new National Policy of Urban Development 2013, recently promulgated by the President of Chile. It is in this issue that one of the guidances of the faculty to which the school belongs intervenes, the one concerning the exploration of interdisciplinary niches and links, especially with other units in the faculty. This purpose aims to motivate the academic community to constitute mixed groups that reproduce within the university, the intersectoral complexity of the professional work by architects. The above-mentioned diversity has existed not only in the School of Architecture. To better explore its potential, it has been channeled in faculty units, like in the case of the External Services Unit and the City and Territory Laboratory. Finally, the mentioned expanded field and widened vision involve a significant opening to the international scenario as well. This feature, which has characterized the work of the unit since its foundation, involves a progressive commitment of a more significant proportion of the community, while being institutionalized not only as a complementary experience, but also as a key part of the academic project. The School of Architecture, Art and Design, FAAD, is currently made up of 3 pre-degree programs: Architecture, Art and Design, and a master's degree program. Besides, it is complemented by 3 linking units: the City and Territory Laboratory, LCT, the External Services Unit, USE, and the Creativity and Innovation Laboratory, LCI, by an Audiovisual Research Program, PIA, Archive Image Time City, and an editorial project which main product is Magazine 180. Our student population consists of a total of 1,350 students in these 3 programs. Out of these, 523 students correspond to the architecture school, 727 students to the design program, and 150 students to art. Our master